Ben, Captology taking off. Lots of interest around it and keen to actually talk more about that. But I want to share a bit about a book I'm reading at the moment, which I told you about last night.
Please do.
What interests you most about what I mentioned?
Look, the whole history and the way it was broken down to me just resonated, and I think it'll resonate with listeners. So I'm keen to start with what you've learned in terms of the history of the internet.
Nice. So the book is titled The Internet is Not the Answer by Mr. Keen. I've never ever seen such a sequential, comprehensive breakdown from the birth of the internet with Tim Berners-Lee and APRANET, Defense University Academia research funded,
Mhm.
into commercialization and everything from the rise of HTML into HTTPS into URLs and just now how that's exploded. So it's taken us into now the journey around Kodak. I
Yep.
think a lot of people are familiar with the story around Kodak, which really the innovators' dilemma, where they failed to actually see the rise of digital information and how they could transform their 130-year-old behemoth business from analog Kodak moments into the world of Instagram realities and digital photoshopping.
I
So,
remember I remember having a Kodak camera as a kid. This is showing my age, where you used to have to wind up the side, and it was all you could buy was the Kodak disposable cameras. At events, there would be Kodak cameras on the tables, and it was the thing. It was a huge business at the time.
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because one of the lead strategists globally for Kodak actually saw that vision, but he wasn't supported internally. So it actually has a lot to say about what companies experience today, or rather individuals experience today, where they see the innovative idea, but they actually struggle to innovate.
Yeah.
And we know, working in the tech industry, you have to innovate, and and it can't be the innovation labs because that's the last place innovation happens. Forcing people, jigsawing them into a room to say, think differently, just doesn't happen. Has to be part of the DNA of a company, an organization. But it comes down to the way people think and how autonomous they are, and bringing ideas to the fold and being able to execute fast on them. And some of the largest tech companies in the world have been successful because they've been able to do that.
And I don't think there is a successful, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but a business that now is one of the pillars of technology, or what have you, that has come from an innovation hub. To me, an innovation
Yeah.
hub is almost like a room full of people where they're trying to create an escape path to get out of the innovation hub.
Yeah. It doesn't work. No, it has to be part of the DNA. When I was working at SAP, I took a photo and I reflect back on it. It's funny because Kayla mentioned to me, you should go back to your photos and like write stories around them, what memories they bring for you. So I'm going to,
Like a Marie Kondo version of
yeah, exactly. Of tech. Yeah. But in the Silicon Valley at the SAP headquarters, there was this big communal wall and it said, there's a better way to do things. Find it. And it just spoke to that innovation and again, making sure that people are always thinking outside the box and bringing that to the fold.
amazing. And so Kodak, back to Kodak, the way you talk about not having support reminds me of Blockbuster as well. In terms of Blockbuster, I remember having a Kodak camera as a kid. This is showing my age, where you used to have to wind up the side, and it was all you could buy was the Kodak disposable cameras. At events, there would be Kodak cameras on the tables, and it was the thing. It was a huge business at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too, because one of the lead strategists globally for Kodak actually saw that vision, but he wasn't supported internally. So it actually has a lot to say about what companies experience today, or rather individuals experience today, where they see the innovative idea, but they actually struggle to innovate. What interests you most about what I mentioned?
Look, the whole history and the way it was broken down to me just resonated, and I think it'll resonate with listeners. So I'm keen to start with what you've learned in terms of the history of the internet.
Nice, yeah. So the book is titled The Internet is Not the End by Mr. Keen, but it
Okay.
basically, I've never ever seen such a sequential, comprehensive breakdown from the birth of the internet with Tim Berners-Lee and APRANET, Defense University Academia research funded,
Mhm.
into commercialization and everything from the rise of HTML into HTTPS into URLs and just now how that's exploded. So it's taken us into now the journey around Kodak. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are familiar with the story around Kodak, which really the innovators' dilemma, where they failed to actually see the rise of digital information and how they could transform their 130-year-old behemoth business from analog Kodak moments into the world of Instagram realities and digital photoshopping. And we know, working in the tech industry, you have to innovate, and it can't be the innovation labs because that's the last place innovation happens. Forcing people, jigsawing them into a room to say, think differently, this doesn't happen. It has to be part of the DNA of a company, an organization. But it comes down to the way people think and how autonomous they are and bringing ideas to the fold and being able to execute fast on them. And some of the largest tech companies in the world have been successful because they've been able to do that.
And I don't think there is a successful, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but a business that now is one of the pillars of technology or what have you that has come from an innovation hub. To me, an innovation hub is almost like a room full of people where they're trying to create an escape path to get out of the innovation hub.
Yeah. It doesn't work. No, it has to be part of the DNA. When I was working at SAP, I took a photo and I reflect back on it. It's funny because Kayla mentioned to me, you should go back to your photos and like write stories around them, what memories they bring for you. So I'm going to,
Like a Marie Kondo version of self.
yeah, exactly. Of tech. Yeah. But in the Silicon Valley at the SAP headquarters, there was this big communal wall and it said, there's a better way to do things. Find it. And it just spoke to that innovation and again, making sure that people are always thinking outside the box and bringing that to the fold.
Amazing. And so Kodak, back to Kodak, the way you talk about not having support reminds me of Blockbuster as well, in terms of Blockbuster versus Netflix. It was a very similar, very similar thought track to the Blockbuster leadership, that innovation wasn't required because they were dominating the market at the time, and they absolutely were. So for them to then shift to a digital economy was not even part of their business plan. It was not even part of the thought process to that, which is why Netflix
Succeeded. Yeah, totally. The old classic brick and mortar stores. See
Yeah.
you later. Yeah.
Yeah. They were good times though. I do remember going to a Blockbuster and walking around and looking for the right video to watch at the time, or the right TV.
Well, it was the experience, right? You'd walk into the shop, you'd browse
Yeah.
through a little bit after work, whatever, take the kids in there, they can run through the kids' aisles, and you could pick the DVD or that was a VHS at the time, wasn't it? Or a mix
Yeah.
of both. And you could scan that. They actually made a lot of money on fees, not returning on time and all the rest. And then lo and behold, digital revolution, Netflix rises, pitched to the Blockbuster business. They said, nope, never going to work. And I just actually love Gary Vee's notion of the last thing I want to do these days is walk into a store. I want to lay back on my bed and flick the remote to the channel that I want to watch. It's right at the fingertips now. So
Yeah.
it's remarkable how it evolves.
And it goes across all areas, all lines of business, from food, Uber Eats, all the way to shopping, to look at home automation now. With you've got a robo cleaner.
Yeah.
You can do that from your bed too. You can tell it to turn on and clean the floors.
Totally. Yeah. Just straight from the applications on the phone. It's amazing. So as it relates back to the book, internet is not the answer. I'm probably about halfway through, but the whole premise is based on the fact that it tells a storyline around robots taking jobs. It's a remarkable oversimplification, of course, but it was actually required stark statistics brought forward in the book to say, well, whilst there's an argument to say automation and the digital way of life will bring more jobs to fruition, people can retrain in digital skills and the rest. It's really interesting to see how many jobs have been lost because of the rise of digital technologies. And interestingly, I was actually just speaking about this with Tani this morning on our 5-kilometer walk with Blaze and Tani here on the beautiful Gold Coast. The weather is terrible at the moment.
Sunshine State, it's just not happening.
Yeah. And just talking about how when one of the local councils up in far north Queensland was speaking about the demand and supply associated with rentals now. There's been this great mass migration from some very capital cities in the southern parts of the east coast in Australia. If you included Ben, the migration up north into the Sunshine State, beautiful landscapes on the Gold Coast and even further north, Byron Bay and the rest, south of the Gold Coast, but of course even North Queensland and the rest. And there was an example given where some of the real estate agencies were saying that the local council has actually put restrictions on how long people can actually rent out their Airbnbs because it's butchering the local economy.
It is.
In that industry. And I was just like, wow, I drew the line back into the book to say they talk about Airbnb and how that's shifted, but plenty of other examples too, where some of the largest employers in the world back in the last 20, 30, 50 years have employed up to 700,000 people and they've captured $1 billion in market share, for example, some of the largest companies in the world back in the industrial age and all the rest. But now the biggest tech companies in the world employ a quarter of that, but they have 10x the amount of market share. So you get this grand scaling of how profitable and how big these tech companies are, but how much, again, they're butchering those local economies and taking jobs away from people. So now we see this in our industry, critical skill shortages. People are like, wow, where is the future going? How do I get into tech? How do I even work with this? What skills do I need now to keep pace with technology? But the reality is there's two very equal sides to the argument. I don't even know if I'd call them equal, but I like to take an open-minded picture and say, let's play devil's advocate. Let's understand either arguments, but geez, there's a very big case with the rise of technologies and the loss of jobs. So up to that part in the book, and it's a very stark, interesting comparison for sure.
isn't it? It paints an interesting picture of the future. And Elon Musk came out not long ago. I was talking to how there needs to be essentially a globally gifted wage in the future with the rise of robotics, with the rise of the autonomous everything. There will be a requirement for humans to receive a globally gifted wage in
I
order.
love that you call it a globally gifted wage.
Yeah, well,
Gifting you the wage.
to describe
No, well, there's
a
like,
wage.
yeah, I believe he's speaking about, it's actually drawn out of Yuval Noah Harari, speaking about the universal basic income, UBI.
Yep.
Fundamentally saying there's predictions that there will become a global useless race
Yep.
that don't have the skills, expertise, intellect, whatever the case is, to be able to keep pace of change. So they have no contributions to society or the market in a capitalist world. So we've got to give them a universal basic income to cover their basic needs and expenses. Like that,
Wild, isn't it?
what, yeah. But then Elon Musk was talking about it as well, saying similar
He
thing,
was.
right?
Yeah. In a recent TED talk, Elon Musk was talking at the Gigafactory. It was the launch of the Gigafactory, talking with one of the
Yeah.
interviewers there. Excuse me. And he talked about and I'm going to keep calling it the globally gifted wage because I think that just makes so much sense. But he was saying that
Yeah.
it's an absolute requirement in the future, and it will become more of a requirement and more of a conversation at the global superpowers or the global economy leaders to provide that to citizens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, well, 21st Lessons for the 21st Century is also a great read. I highly recommend that. Could be a bit of fear, but don't look at it that way. It's more about understanding where the world could eventually go. Speaking about those catastrophic threats to humanity. So
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. What are we doing? Book review in this episode? Yeah.
I know, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
What are the catastrophic threats to humanity? Give me some examples of that.
Well, just things like degradation of the biosphere.
Yep.
Which is
has already
climate change.
started. Yeah.
Yeah. So understanding that seems like it's on a closer horizon than we all imagined.
As you're experiencing on the Gold Coast of the weather.
Yeah, exactly. Then, of course, the argument around the global useless race and
Yep.
the digital economy taking off so vastly that humanity will struggle to keep pace with it. And then there's another key theme, maybe around key themes around wars and things like that, pretty sure.
Yeah.
So he spoke at Davos World Economic Forum only really recently in the last 3 or 4 years and delivered that. He's a historian, but he has the premise of the best way to predict the future is to understand trends of the past and cycles and all sorts of things, which is also themes that come up in people like Ray Dalio, global economist, and has been really successful with his hedge fund, and he understands the world in big 100-year cycles. So it's just very interesting because we typically have a lifespan less than 100 years for the most part. Personally, I have a longer one than that. But if we understand the world in 100-year cycles and even 500-year cycles and 1,000 and 10,000 and all the rest, we can actually start to see those repeatable principles that keep resurfacing. And even some of the stuff we're seeing now with like the shift in the global world powers, Western into Eastern and the rest. So yeah, really interesting themes.
It carries across history. It has been that way for known history, and it will be a thing for future generations as well.
Yeah.
Something you've got me on recently is Alvin Toffer and his books and his theories. And I've just purchased 3 of his books through Amazon, so I'm excited to get into that. He's a similar track, right? He talks about industry and the industry shifts.
Yeah, he does. He's also, when was he? He was in the period of the 50s to 70s, I think, really solid thought leadership. Yeah, that's my audio there. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was, again, well, I don't know if he was exactly a historian, but he was more of like a futurist.
Yeah.
And I would say most likely in that era, there were some question marks around it. But to me, it's remarkable how accurately predictive he was in the last 50, 60 years with what is actually happening today.
Yeah.
He talks about a reading Third Wave at the moment. And there's a really good book review on the podcast that I sent to you just yesterday.
Yeah.
I understand this is a great synopsis of his theories. It speaks about, and this will resonate with the audience too, because we tend to think of this around the big global revolutions that occurred from the industrial age, or the agricultural age into the industrial age, and now from the industrial age into the digital and information age. So he relates that back to first, second, and third wave societies.
Mm-hmm.
And again, having deep conversations before 6 a.m. today. Repeat this, the conversations I had with the girls this morning. But fundamentally, in first wave societies, it was very prosumerism. So you would be in small villages, you would be the farmer estates, you would create your own food sources, look after your immediate family, potentially a bit more agricultural. And so you would produce and consume right where you were.
Yeah.
And even looking further back, I find helpful because I've read before wheat is actually the most brilliant species because of its ability to recreate so much, and it basically changed humans' behavior to be able to farm for it. And hence we create a lot of food sources from wheat. It's a whole other thing we can go into.
Seriously, just on that quickly.
Yeah.
Who's the first person that looked at that and then thought, if I crush that up and, dry it out, crush it up, add some water, add some salt, I can make some bread. Just that, I look at things every day and think the first person to do that really went through.
Amazing. Yeah, surely it was the Italians.
Has to be.
Well, we made pizza dough.
And tomatoes.
And tomatoes, yeah. Oh dear. Yeah. So nonetheless, then the Industrial Revolution came with the rise of the steam engines, and pretty familiar with the story there. We basically split our identities in half from the producer and the consumer. So no longer did we immediately have food sources in our backyards. We know we go to the grocery store these days to pick those up, create food from that. We are centralized and consolidated into large cities for the most part. And so we've lived over the last 100 years now in this industrial society. The factory worker, even the education and the skill system has been built around show up on time, learned that. And also just the recreation. He calls it temporal consolidation or something like that, where we've sort of trained ourselves to think about time and space in certain ways and Newton and the laws and all the rest. And we taught our kids about that. And this whole system has been created over the last 100 years to be this industrial society.
Yeah.
Go to work to pay for the car, pay for the car to drive to work. All of a sudden, in now third wave societies, which we're on the brink of today, the pandemic hits, people rapidly shift to remote work. The pandemic COVID-19 was the key driver for digital transformation, hilarious meme in the industry, but so true, right? And now we're seeing this dispersion of people that are moving away from the central hubs, starting to want to live on acreage, go back to that prosumerism, completely rethink their lives and why they even go to work these days because of a shift even in global consciousness. And that this third wave society is actually happening now. So again, it's incredible to me to think Elvin Toffler had these theories and concepts 50, 60 years ago in the crux of second wave societies to say this is happening. The entire nuclear family DNA is changing. The workforce is changing. The education system needs a reform. So it's something we're both very passionate about. And it's like the whole world is actually changing in the midst of it. And then you look at things like even identity crisis, midlife, quarter life crisis. Crisis is probably a strong word, but we know that in Australia, there's like very daunting mental health statistics. We're a pretty drunk country as well. Go on a whole new episode around that. And so there's all these big push and pulls and these global factors happening. And why I like to zoom out to the global perspective to help understand what's happening in the world so I can understand my small piece in it a lot better with a lot more clarity and live and understand the big superstructures that I'm living in to better make sense of it all. So yeah, I feel like I've gone on a massive Ben tangent there, and I will pause, but there's just so much good stuff in those series, and I really recommend it a lot too. And let's post a link too from that book recap because it's really interesting.
Show notes. If you're on Spotify, the show notes are about that way.
Yeah.
If you're on Apple Podcasts, they're that way.
That way, exactly.
Yeah.
Also, if you are on Spotify, I'm not too sure if the audience knows this, but they recently released the MP4 video conversion on Spotify. So if you are on Spotify, flick your phone up and you can actually see Ben and I. It's really cool. Not available on Apple, but maybe soon to be.
Soon, surely. Yeah, they'll follow.
Hey, yourselves.
Yeah, I've got a face for podcast and radio, not for video.
Yeah.
Look, you mentioned consumer and producer. I'll throw a challenging statement out, and you're absolutely right. I said again, but it is shifting. And I would say that the definition of producer in the second wave has shifted into what is now the third wave because, and the reason I say that is we are now the consumer, we are now the product for technology. We are the ones that are providing the advertising. We are the ones providing the metrics to drive, and then this will filter into Captology. But I'll throw that challenging statement out and then see if you agree that the lines have been blurred from what we traditionally understand producer versus consumer is, and we are now the product.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's the behavioral science comes into it now, Captology, computers as persuasive technologies, because we know data's the new oil, but what does that mean? Profitability in capitalism is coming from behavioral science, predictive analytics associated with human behavior. Cleverly, the technology is being designed to change the psyche and to change behavior to make it more predictable. So turn the notifications off, understand how you're wired, know your biases, all those soft skill behavioral elements to being a human to combat quite a daunting type of outcome there. But data's the new oil being that the most valuable resource today is human behavior. So that's why this is such a hotly debated topic because all of the mega tech companies are building mega businesses around and selling, the avatar of Gabe, on the internet based on predictive analytics behind what I'll do. So they can sell me things, they can better target my needs. I'm a massive minimalist, so ads usually don't work anyways. And I'm always trying to fight against technology and experiment around it. But nonetheless, it's a very important conversation to bring to the fold.
Yeah. Again, I've said this already in this episode, it paints a daunting picture of the future. If we do succumb to just allowing behavior analytics and the fact that data is oil and we are the data required to produce that oil, if we adopt that wholly and solely. What would you offer up to the listeners? And the reason I ask is I know you do this really well. And what would you offer up to the listeners in order to understand how they're wired, in order to understand how their behaviors are being captured, how they're being sold, and how to, if they are interested, how to prevent that?
Yeah, it's really important to understand the fundamentals of neuroscience.
Yeah.
The way the brain's wired, the hormonal, chemical balances or imbalances, the serotonins and dopamines of the world. What does that mean to me? How can I understand that better to understand my behaviors? Even as simple as for females understanding the menstrual cycle and how that changes mood and therefore changes action and changes the way we think. They make major life decisions a day out from getting a period, for example. And on the contrary, for men, looking at testosterone levels and how healthy you are around that and the chemical balances inside of your body. And then we go into a whole raft of unlocking the Pandora's box around biohacking, which could just be no alcohol, sleeping better, or it could be implant a chip into your body. There's a lot of things out there if you just look for them and be curious about them. But as it relates to your question, Ben, understanding how we're wired is so important because we all have cognitive biases. We have organizational biases too, by the way. We all have a different way of thinking. We're wired differently. Psychometrics can tell us the individuality behind ourselves, where our strengths lie, why I think a certain way, why I'm more inclined to go and jump out of a plane on a first date as opposed to go to a quiet library. because I'm wired a certain way, right? So
It's a true story for the listeners as well.
yeah, thanks, Kate. She's very introverted too, so just like I enjoyed it anyways. But yeah, just coming back to the key point and to simplify it too, the better you can understand yourself, the better you can navigate the world because we are all so different. And so as we go through a very confusing period of understanding how to best integrate with technology, which we're all still working out how to do, and the misinformation that comes with everything we see on social media or otherwise, the things we're quite primitive. What's the old quote? There's a really great quote that says, humans are so interesting, right? Because we have primitive ways of thinking
Mhm.
with outdated industrial enterprises, but we have godlike technologies, something like that, right? So that is just so confusing to us. So
Yes.
it comes back to how we're wired, our individuality, but we do have those pretty primitive social inclinations to the way that we live as a species, that we have these godlike technologies that are just expanding at such a rapid rate and almost re-engineering the way that we think and behave, that we need to actually work out what's happening, make sense of it, talk about it, communicate it, bring that awareness to it, and work out how to actually better live with it in a more symbiotic way.
And the lazy brain will just adopt to change and fall into the ease and the comfortability of technology adoption. And as that changes, if it's easy, humans by design will fall into that lazy brain and just allow for it to happen, which is why I think a lot of us don't have the ability to understand where our cognitive bias is, where our organizational bias is, understand why we made decisions. Something I did a few years ago, and I'm now talking about it, I want to reintroduce it, is I do mind mapping a lot. And it really helps me as a person just to understand, to plan, very strategic that way. But I used to do mind mapping, reflective mind mapping from the day past. And I would sit down and work out 3 decisions I made across the day, and then mind map out why I think I made that decision at the time, and then put the outcome of the decision and try and work out how and why I made that decision. It was a really interesting process. And we did this as part of a specialty course in at Tucumunda, I think it was delivered from. But it was more on understanding your decision-making process in
Mm.
long-term decisions versus rapid decision-making.
Yeah.
Rapid decision-making is the front of your brain and it just activates, and it's that fight or flight moment.
Mhm.
And it was designed so that in battle, you have the ability to make rapid decisions by trusting your instinct. Whereas the reflective analysis through mind mapping of your decisions throughout the day would showcase why the long part of your brain or the midterm part of your brain makes decisions, and how that affects the outcome of that decision.
Mhm.
And it was just interesting because then you do, you do a run over the course of that week, and you read back on what you decided on, and was that a good decision with a week's in review. It was really interesting to see the decisions you made, why you made that, and if it still affected you at that time.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a good way to work out my cognitive bias at the time. But cognitive bias shifts. We might have a foundation for cognitive bias, but that is going to shift over time. So in order to understand your cognitive bias, these things need to be done not periodically. They need to be done. They need to be
Yeah.
mapped out.
For sure. And that shift that you speak about, it's always contextual. And there's so many
Yep.
variables. What you just spoke about there brought relevancy to Thinking Fast and Slow. Also a great read, but talking about how we have those two systems in the way we think in our brain, which are constantly fighting over the control of our actions and behaviors. And so because of that polarization, it can actually lead to errors in judgments and decisions and memory and all the rest. And so therefore it's really important to understand them. And when those systems come into play, I think as you described it was great. So yeah, there's just so much to it, and always contextual, always variable.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that was one way that I learned how my brain processes, and it's given me the ability to where I am today to understand that my quick brain generally makes better decisions than the longer I have to have the inner brain working for that
Mm.
long-term decision making.
Yeah. And that'll be because of the way you're wired, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
absolutely.
I was going to bring that back to, you mentioned at the start that the lazy factor to humanity, or to humans rather, it's just so true because it's the old path of least resistance. And then as we relate it back to technology and even captology, the invention of the infinite scroll, like what that is just like the ultimate engineering ploy, where you actually go into the social media feeds and you have the infinite scrolling ability, path of least resistance. You just sit there all day. I had my little sister say to me the other day, I'm gonna give up social media for whatever period of time, start somewhere, because I go to bed at night and I take a book and my phone and I say to myself, I'm gonna read tonight. She gets into bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock. And she goes, okay, I'm going to read. I'll just check my feed. And then all of a sudden it's 11 p.m. and she hasn't read yet. And so I have to change something. Otherwise, I'm going to continue infinitely scrolling my life away.
Captology. That's why those
Totally.
apps were designed, and that's the outcome that they were designed for.
Yeah.
Apps like Instagram have Captology at the basis of their source code in order to effect change in our human behavior, which is then sold to the highest bidder,
Yeah.
essentially.
Exactly.
And that's what they prey on. And prey is a strong term too, but if we can put that lens across it, that is essentially what it is. It's preying on our human behavior to retain the never ending scroll.
For those who have not seen it, we'll put a link as well. But Social Dilemma on Netflix, great series to watch on this exact topic.
Yeah. It actually interviews some of the original members of that first Captology course. And it's interesting to see, I believe there was 15 students on that program at the time through Stanford. And majority of them went off into what are now the biggest technology companies for social media and all sorts. You know, they interview some of the technologists that are a part of Twitter, that are a part of Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram. And from that course, you can see if we could put it into a graph, it would just be a hockey stick vertical
Yeah. Yep.
on the uptake and the length of time users spend on those applications as a result of the impact Captology had in source code.
What's the average screen time for some of those apps? A lot of people are in the 50, 60, 70, 80% region, time spent on Instagram, time spent on TikTok. Parents looking to put restrictions on their kids around screen time and all sorts of things.
That's the lazy brain again.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the lazy brain. It just
Yeah.
falls into, and yeah, it's so interesting to see how, behavioral impact in technology has impacted life. You know, where you sit on the train and you see everyone is buried in their phone, whether it's social media or whether it's work on the run, what have you. It's changed human interaction.
So what do we do about it, Ben?
Great question, Gabe. You know, what you've done over the last 12 months and over the last couple of years leading up to what you're doing now is, it's inspirational to me. And I would love to see,
Thanks.
I would love to have the courage to be able to do some of the things you've done there. So perhaps we can talk about what you've done in terms of social media as a start. So,
Oh yeah. I was going to ask you, what are those examples?
yeah. Well, okay, well, I'll start. The first one is social media. You've gone off social media outside of LinkedIn because LinkedIn is a great platform for business networking and all sorts, professional. But all the social media platforms you're off at the moment, you've been off for some time, I believe, since this year, this coming year.
Yeah, we've got the challenge to go social media free. Couple of exemptions there
Yep.
for business purposes, but absolutely the likes of Instagram in particular, which I spent a lot of time on, particularly the previous lives, but completely off them altogether, going strong for the year. So it's making sure that we've got control and directing the attention, and also proving to ourselves that psychologically we're able to make our own decisions around technology and be able to go for I would say a very long period of time without at all using something like Instagram. So that's been good so far.
Yeah. And to me, it would be for a lot of people a shift in mindset, in habit, in everything's to do with muscle memory. You know, wake up in the morning, roll over, turn the alarm off, pick up your phone, scroll through Instagram. It's muscle memory and forming bad habits that impact your then never ending scroll. And something else you've done is your sleep cycles, which I'm really interested to, and get your daily routine started, which might not seem like it has an impact on the conversation we're having now, but for me, it really does because you're setting yourself up for success for the day.
Yeah.
And you're not allowing your brain to wander at night when the lazy brain kicks in to jump on the social media platforms.
I first heard out of the CrossFit community, win the morning, win the day. Probably a quote from way back when, but as it relates to having a successful day, it starts the night before, but the morning routine is crucial. So we are very precious about sleep cycles, and I was a horrendous sleeper. Would party to very late times of the morning, drink a lot of alcohol. So we'll come back to that point. But for sleep is so important because of the cerebral flushing of the fluid in the spinal cord. It revamps the entire brain. It solidifies memories. It gets rid of negative energies and events of the previous day. Sleep is so underrated and so important to the way we function. And there's a lot more science and literature coming out about that. And I even mentioned before when we're talking about neuroscience, and there's a very, very good podcast called The Huberman Lab from Andrew Huberman. He's a leading neuroscientist, talks a lot about neuroplasticity and a lot of these key themes. He's out of one of the major universities in the US as well, but he's got amazing literature on this. He featured recently on a Jay Shetty episode.
Andrew, if you're listening, we're coming for you for another episode.
Yep, come on over. Send him a snippet of this. Yeah, and so it's just so important from the neurological makeup of our DNA to actually have very good sleep and to make sure it's high quality sleep, REM, and even things like naps in the day, just to have that. Andrew speaks about it. It's like the non-sleep related, again, just like that flushing out of memories and everything.
Like someone then.
Yeah, I can sleep now. Yeah, and so what our routine? We're in bed early. If we can get into bed at 6:37, please, like we will take every opportunity to do that. Usually asleep before 8, and we religiously get up every morning at 4:30 a.m. Start the day with a really good, well-driven morning routine. Go and do a workout. We get into a flow state as well around using the morning, not to be so rigid around the timelines, but actually to move through the morning, get an exercise, walk our dog, and then we read as well. So we read every morning, every night, somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes, spend some time together, and we have the crux of the workday where we work. We're also testing some new science coming out around focus and how to get the best productivity. The whole realm around productivity is absolutely shifting, especially linked to the change in the workforce and digital revolution and everything. Output, all these sorts of things. But to get good focus and good deep study time, especially when, my job, I'm a relationship type person. So I'm very much building relationships face to face. When I'm not in the office or out at a client or a partner event or office, I'll be at home. And if there's a requirement for me to do deep, intensive work and even meetings back to back and things like that, I'll actually look to do. We're testing this out and things change as well. So it depends on the type of work you do. But if we can get to a point where we're doing 5 hours of really deep, intense studied work time, that's remarkable what it does when you get into that state. So testing that out, and we'll typically eat 2 times a day as well. So everything's linked, comes back to also not looking at things in isolation and making sure there's a nice flow and rhythm in between each of it, but helps set us up as well for good sleep and bringing that back to the focus and good hygiene as well around what we use in the day. Technology as an enabler, as a tool, where does that come into my life? When do I use it? And very importantly, switching off from technology early, switching off from the blue light early, and absolutely not going to bed. I don't even have my phone in my room. You know this better than anyone, Ben. I'm not contactable at certain parts of the week or the day because I'm just completely so far removed from any form of technology. So
And
served me well so far.
as a technologist, like kudos to you for being able to do that. And again, I wish I had the courage to be able to do. I hope I can in the future. So your technology span or your influenceability via technology, yeah, influenceability is that's a lot of syllables today.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Got a dictionary sooner or later.
it will be. We'll get that. We'll get that.
Love it.
So I'm going to say it again, influenceability on technology is you've only got essentially 6, 7, perhaps 8 hours in a really busy day where technology is that enabling element to get your daily tasks done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say people may think of me like, oh, Gabe's always on LinkedIn, or it's just so there. But I actually very methodically and specifically choose where I direct my attention because that's the most important resource for me personally. So hence, I always appreciate people tuning into this podcast because I really value people's attention because we should all be in control of that. I don't think a lot of people are completely because of these themes around captology and what we've spoken about today. But for sure, it's like really directing that attention for me and making sure I'm using it to how I want it to use it and for it to not use me. So yeah, it's just,
I love that. And this is all coming full circle because I've got a question. I've got a quote that I want to read to you that I found last night. But the reason I asked that is because essentially you're freeing your mind of the technology. You're freeing your mind of what's next in the technology. You're freeing your mind of what have I got coming up, and you're being present. Now, the quote I want to read to you, Gabe, and it comes back to Captology.
I'm excited.
It's about computer colonization. And it was from a gentleman by the name of Rushkoff. And this was written in 1945 as part of one of the Atlantic missions. Rushkov theorized about the first computer, the idea for Memex, MEMEX, for anyone that was listening that wants to research it. Interesting topic again, rabbit hole that we could
Memex,
go to
MEM.
MEMEX, and how it would work, and it would store our memory and all that comes with it. But so that was Rushkov's, he theorized that. And we talk about, I said, I'm going to keep tapping my leg. But Vannevar Bush was the guy who was in charge of computers during the war. And he wrote this essay for the Atlantic that was with Rushkov.
In 47.
As a way of
Great
arguing
preamble.
to arguing Eisenhower that you've got to keep developing computer technology because even though, this is the quote, even though we don't need it for the war, we need it for the economy. We can't colonize other places anymore. They're pushing back. We can't take more stuff from them. We need new landscape to colonize, and computers would give that. But the one thing that we decided to colonize with them is ours and their minds.
Yeah. It's remarkable.
But this is 1945. Like we're talking,
Yeah. Yeah.
nearly 100 years ago,
Yeah.
they had the concept of being able to colonize minds and adopt change through technology when computers were really only in their infancy.
Well, absolutely. That's the next phase of colonization, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the British, the French, the Germans colonized geographically pretty well, disastrously too, by the way, because of the shift between first wave and second wave societies. And so for Eisenhower and Bush and Rushkoff, memory test there, to actually have the foresight 70 years ago to say we need to colonize computers in the digital world and shape behavior and control people's minds, like more people need to know about that.
They absolutely do. I think people are aware of it, but I just don't think they understand the impact that it has long term.
Yeah.
Everyone understands that social media at the moment is, I spend so much time on Instagram, I spend so much time on Facebook. We understand that it's not the best thing for our brains. We understand it's not the best thing for right now. What they don't consider is how it's impacting the younger generation.
It's going to be very isolating. And it's even drawn back to things like mental health and the rest. We see, again, the release of Facebook files from the Wall Street Journal speaking about purposely negatively engineering the feeds to see how society would relate to it. There's been so many examples of harassment and bullying, and unfortunately, suicide and all the rest. Like, it's just such a sad reality that we're living in. It's changing even the psyche of people, like young like young girls, the youth. More like the body image comparisons, what they see on a completely photoshopped news feed around social media. It's changing the way they think, the way they perceive about themselves. It's incredibly isolating, and it's a very lonely reality. And people aren't understanding it to its what it needs to be understood as. So then they're not able to provide those supportive structures because again, we're still working out how to live and work and play and use technology. It's just really disrupting society.
As a father of 2 girls, it's horrifying to put my futurist hat on and paint that picture of where the next generation will end up if things don't change rapidly. And the awareness of Captology's algorithms and Captology in all types of applications and other technologies we leverage, smart homes, smart everythings, and how the impact that's going to have on future generations. The lazy brain will take over, and then innovation will slow. It's just, as a father of 2 girls, even right now, seeing the curated news feeds that are driven by the Captology-based algorithms to generate that isolation is scary. I think a lot of the youth are in that isolated state and are internalizing too much, which is why the mental health issues are so prolific.
Yeah, we're taking quite a dark slant to technology here. And of course, we want to take a more optimistic approach and work out how to actually engineer the technology for the betterment of humanity. So we'll unravel that as more conversations ensue. But for sure, the FUD around technology is dark, but we need to talk about it to understand how to work with it
Well, it's
and
got
shift
such
it.
power. It's got such power to
Yeah.
revolutionize the way we live, the way we operate, but it needs to be understood. And I think that's the conversation we're having now is the requirement for better education on the current state of technology and how we can leverage technology as the enabling element to where we
For sure.
live.
Yeah. But even just the argument around, we live in a world that's surrounded by satellites. It enables the technology and the connectivity and being able to tap into that. But also the internet is not accessible everywhere in the world. Internet adoption, of course, has risen, but in wealthier and typically more Western societies, we have more than one device that connects to the internet. So the uptake is more and more. But there's a lot of countries around the world that don't even have basic needs. There's still poverty issues, there's equality issues, there's wars, there's everything in between. And other countries that don't have access to the internet. So they're not even there yet. The laggards in the adoption cycle and all this sort of thing. They haven't even come to breach the surface around how do we actually combat captology and all of this because they're not even yet to adopt basic internet services. So we have this slinky effect across the whole world as the technology adoption and this widening and widening and widening socioeconomic gap, the wealth gap, people revolutionizing against the wealthy billionaires. We know that narrative, but we've all got to figure out what we can do to take a look at that holistic global picture, use technology and deploy that to help solve things like poverty and actually bring that equality conversation to the forefront. It's not going to happen if we keep losing jobs because of digital revolutions and building more and more infinite scrolls into the way technology is designed to control more affluent societies. We need to use technology to actually better humanity. And the way we do that is looking at technology and saying, how do we use this for the UN sustainability goals? Let's look at how we do that, So yeah, there's just so many places we can go with this, but it's important to, again, take that snapshot at the global level.
My mind's melting after that statement. And I know that the listeners are just sitting there with their earphones on trying to wipe the cerebral.
With good sleep.
Yeah.
What's another thing around focus and the like? But yeah, it's certainly like belief systems, understanding how the brain's wired, but positive self-talk, reducing filler words and weasel words. I said to Ben, every time you say, tap yourself on the leg, I recommend that.
Breathe on my leg.
So good. But yeah, it's just all of that comes all into play. So that's how we solve these things. We need clarity of thought, first and foremost, which stems from good sleep, not overdoing it with the bougie lunches and alcoholic intake, so that we can put our minds towards how we solve global issues around poverty and using technology and helping solve mental health issues and all these things that affect all of us and our families and our friends. And we need to do that with all these good hygienes and habits and these positive intentions and these affirmations about where we're going to take our life and the choice between what we're going to do and contribute to society and package all this together and build a community around it, which we're doing to solve these mega issues, these world issues, and all the rest. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk. How do we do it?
Replay this episode and listen back. That's the opportunity for me. The opportunity for technology is exactly as you stated. And I think it starts early with the mental health implications that we're currently seeing, or the mental health pandemic that we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah.
That's the early adoption to technology as the enabler to enable better mental health, to enable better education. We talk all the time about reinventing the education system more broadly, not just here regionally. That there's so much that can be done, and technology could be the enabling force to drive that change, or should be the enabling force behind that change.
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to hear ideas from the audience. If you're listening to this, reach out to us any way you can and contribute to this conversation. And I'd also like to understand what people are looking for to help solve these issues. The world's biggest challenges. How can we all do that together? What's the mechanism? Do we build a community? Do we create the mail list? Do we do the LinkedIn things? Do we create the message? Do we build an affiliate network? Like, give us your idea as to how we can extend this conversation globally and reach as many people as possible. What are your ideas to do that? I want to learn from the audience just as much. Also,
Absolutely.
you need that activation skills, Ben. You need those activator.
They're in both of our top 5, so everyone understands that now. Give us the ideas and we'll activate it.
Evangelizing, so good.
Yeah.
Nice. So where do we go from here? How would you like to wrap up the episode, Ben?
Look,
I've another stories. Oh yeah,
another quote for you. And I just want to, because we were talking about captology sort of underpinning this conversation, and to continue. Lots of people have asked us about captology since the last episode. It seems to be the thing that triggered a lot of conversation, a lot of thoughts, and a lot of you as a listener's own research on captology. So I've been really intrigued by some of the definitions of captology from some of the listeners in their own research. And I'm equally inspired to learn more about captology myself based on some of the things that some of you have found. So, one thing, and I come back to Rushkov. Douglas Rushkov is his full name for anyone that wants to research. He's a futurist as well. But he says in his talks on captology, they learned to take the algorithms from Las Vegas slot machines and port them into news feeds, just to cover off on how captology was started and the premise behind captology. And to me, that is just sums it really nicely, that they took what is an addictive state for human lazy brain in poker machines and then adopted that into application-based technologies for newsfeed.
Consumer. Yeah.
Consumer.
Yeah. It's a great summary. And it's good to highlight that's the point because, and again, the link between the human psyche and our behavior, addiction, everything, it's, Where do we go with it?
It's another rabbit hole as well. Look, I want to ask you, Gabe. We always end our episodes with dark mode questions. We've already given our first stories on dark mode, and there's been a few people that have reached out and shared their dark mode story. As we're filming this,
Nice.
it's on the Gold Coast,
Yeah.
and lots of you have come up and given your thoughts on the dark mode podcast, which we really appreciate.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's lots of support behind it, so there's lots of people that are sharing their dark mode stories. I wondered if anyone had shared any with you, but before I give you that, Mike, I thought it would be fun to share a story that I had from someone that mentioned it at Elsert. And the dark mode story was in line with this. They had no concept of Captology, and they put the lens on Captology as dark mode in a dark sense, and the Captology could be considered as the dark mode of algorithms.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
That's very good. Yeah. Very cool. Like that contribution. I'm going to go out looking for dark mode stories. I don't have one to share, but it's a good way to wrap up even our individual episodes. We can share a story around dark mode from the community. So big fan of that. Thanks for sharing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for the person who shared that. They didn't want to be named, so I'll respect that.
Absolutely. Nice one, Ben. Good chat.
Yeah, great chat.
I'm going to send this episode over to the girls from this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. For everyone that asked as well yesterday, also lots of people just said, is based on the first episode, is this how you and Gabe just talk more broadly? And fortunately, it is exactly how Gabe and I talk.
You said fortunately, right? That was fortunate.
Fortunate there was no un in front of it. And the reason we thought it was fantastic is let's just record it. This is how we talk normally. This is how Gabe and I talk on the phone. So
yeah,
I'm glad everyone's getting something from it and appreciative of everyone's time.
Yeah, I really appreciate people tuning in. It was awesome walking around the floors of the exhibition and also yesterday too. People being like, oh, I tuned into the episode, getting awesome feedback. So appreciate the time. If you listen to 5 minutes or an hour and 5, just as good. But help us join the conversation. And I'm looking forward to, some people have even said to me, oh, I've got a CISO or a retired CISO, or I've got a global analyst leader, or someone I think you would find really interesting, someone I work with. We want everyone to come and join the conversation. So appreciate your time, appreciate your attention, and looking forward to many more conversations, Ben.
Absolutely. I'm going to RSA in a few weeks too. So for our global listeners, feel free to reach out. I'd love to meet with you and get a few spots of recording to throw into the podcast in later episodes as well.
Ben will be traveling with his road mic, so jump on board. Nice one. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks, everybody.
See you, Ben.